You know, there's something uniquely bad about the sucker punch. Maybe it's due to the fact that we have a long history of dueling, and you expect somebody to walk up to you and challenge you when they want to fight you, when they want to hurt you, because that is some level of honorable. However, that's not what we see in constant videos, and obviously, it makes our blood boil when we watch these people who are already most of the time at a physical advantage strike somebody when they're not prepared for it, and the potentially lethal consequences of those actions. I remember there was a video of a guy, elderly man, 67 years old. He started arguing with a Wendy's employee. This is the size difference between the two. And when this elderly man thought that the argument over his order was over and was tasting his Frosty, this larger man decided to go from the side of the counter, walk up to him, and sucker punch him. And that elderly man, after 10 days in the hospital, ultimately ended up dying. Now, I can't show you the sucker punch because of YouTube's terms of service, but these videos are just horrible, and I've gotten to the point in my life where I've decided that if you participate in these actions, if you sucker punch somebody and they end up hitting the ground, and even if they don't die, you should at least be charged with attempted murder, because you should know that striking somebody who's not ready for it, striking somebody who's not prepared for it, who has no defenses up, is inherently dangerous and should be treated as acting with murderous intent. However, people on the left have a different view of these situations, and there was a recent story out of the Bronx where a sucker punch actually went down. The guy's still in the hospital, and yet the Bronx district attorney did something so absurd that we have to talk about it. But before we get into this, I have a sponsor for today's video. We're going to toss it to the sponsor, and then we're going to get back over here and discuss it on the other side. There's a diet that's out there that's really popular among celebrities, among athletes, and about 13 million Americans are on it right now. Of course, it's called the keto diet, and the way it works in principle is you reduce the amount of energy that you're getting for carbs and you substitute it with other things. And in fact, members of my own family, including my mother, are on the keto diet. But the thing is, for normal everyday people, results can be slow. This is one of the reasons why you need something to boost you up, and why I recommend Keto with Justice. This powder enhances a lot of the factors of the keto diet, can help produce ketones and prolong your state of ketosis. And one of the great things about this is that you can get this powder from KetoWithJustice.com for 51% off. Also, there's a 60-day money-back guarantee. So again, keto powder, KetoWithJustice.com, 50% off, and a 60-day money-back guarantee. So I'm not going to show you the video of the sucker punch for obvious reasons, because YouTube's terms of service are what they are, and on podcasts you wouldn't be able to see the video, but I will describe it to you and show you what you need to know about establishing intent related to this case. So 55-year-old Fui Von Pugh, as he's called in the media, maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong, maybe I'm not, don't really care, the guy's a scumbag, decided that in an argument in the middle of the night, or maybe he was just angry at this person, that he needed to start a fight with him. However, unlike somebody who actually has some honor, some integrity, some bravery, he decided to start the fight when this guy wasn't prepared for it. And you could see premeditation on the video, because he's putting on gloves, he's getting ready for this sucker punch, and he comes up behind him before delivering the devastating blow. Now, to be clear, when I say devastating blow, I'm not being hyperbolic. The man that was assaulted fell to the ground, was rushed to the hospital, required brain surgery due to the swelling, and is currently right now in a coma. So when the NYPD caught up to this man, they decided it was appropriate to charge him with attempted murder. The video clearly and obviously shows premeditation with him putting on the gloves. It was a vicious attack that you should know is going to do harm, and again, he went right for the face for no particular reason. Also, this guy has a violent history, which we're going to get into a bit later. However, unfortunately, even though this guy was charged originally by the NYPD appropriately with attempted murder, because by the way, the guy's in a coma, he could still very well die. His life could never be the same due to the serious bodily injury inflicted on him by this criminal. It turns out the Bronx district attorney disagrees. It turns out that this vicious sucker punch, this cowardly action, this premeditated cowardly action, according to the Bronx district attorney, is just a misdemeanor, meaning it is an assault that is just minor. It's no big deal. Don't worry about it. And even though the guy's in a coma, he's facing serious bodily injury, or he could potentially die. He had brain surgery. He could be bankrupt because maybe he didn't have health insurance in order to pay for that brain surgery. Doesn't matter. This guy deserves to be out on the streets because obviously this guy's an upstanding member of the community. I mean, all he did in his past was commit multiple different felonies. I'm sure those felonies were all committed in the name of feeding his family because as we know from the left-wing media, as we know from the progressives, all criminals are definitely Aladdin and we shouldn't worry about crime because if you think about it, he probably sucker punched this guy, put him in a coma, made him have to go through brain surgery because he was trying to give bread to his family. He was just trying to feed his family.
The victim in this case is fighting for his life. The suspect released from custody today with no bail after being charged with only misdemeanors. Our Jessica Formoso has been following this story for us. She's here now with reaction. Jessica.
Good evening, Lori and Steve. Many people outraged tonight knowing that this man is out on the streets. He is a convicted felon, a registered sex offender who spent 6 years in state prison. He was out on parole at the time of that brutal attack last week.
Did you hear all that accurately? Did you get all that? Your ears don't need to be checked. The guy in question, the sucker puncher in this situation, was released without bail, despite the fact that he's a convicted felon, a registered sex offender, spent 6 years in state prison, and is currently on parole for a felony. So this guy is on parole, meaning if he did anything that involved himself with the police, he could easily have his parole violated, but he's currently walking the streets because the Bronx district attorney thought it was appropriate to reduce the charges from attempted murder, which this was, to a misdemeanor. Now you might be thinking to yourself, okay, Sean, sure, he's on the sex offender registry, but honestly, we've seen instances where somebody at 3 o'clock in the morning was drinking and they decided that they needed to pee. They peed near a school. The cops and the district attorney overcharged them with exposing themselves near a school, even though it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's how they ended up on the registry. Or maybe, it could be an incident where the guy was 18, he was a senior in high school, his girlfriend was 16 in high school, the parents got mad, they called the police, and then a prosecutor ended up prosecuting him, ruining his life by putting him on the registry. There are stories like that, and it is good of you guys to think about that, and those stories possibly being indicative of what we're dealing with here. However, let me assure you that he is not one of those people. The reason that this man, who is out on parole, who just sucker punched this guy and originally was charged by the NYPD with attempted murder, which is an accurate charge, was convicted of that sex offense was because he held an underage person at gunpoint and had them perform sexual acts on him.
Fu has a past criminal record. He is a convicted felon. In 1994, the registered sex offender sexually abused a minor at gunpoint. He spent 6 years behind bars with lifetime parole.
This guy is the real deal. He is a genuine sex offender. He is what the registry is set up for, what you need to watch out for. He's currently on parole. His parole wasn't even violated, so he's not back in jail because he sucker punched somebody and tried to kill them. No, and he was reduced to misdemeanor charges, even though what he did is so inherently dangerous, and the damage to his victim is clear and obvious. He still hasn't woken up from his coma.
The NYPD will often issue arrest charges that the district attorney's office will often downgrade after they have processed the case.
According to court documents obtained by Fox 5, Fu's charges have been downgraded by the Bronx DA from attempted murder to now third-degree assault and second-degree harassment, charges that are misdemeanors and not bail eligible.
Now, I know a lot of people are going to think of the Jose Alba case, which was a clear and obvious case of self-defense, where a felon on parole went to attack Alba, and the Manhattan district attorney ended up charging Alba with second-degree murder, and the hypocrisy in that, and they held him on what was attempted to be a $500,000 bond that was later reduced to $250,000, then reduced to $50,000 because they were trying to go after this guy despite video evidence showing Alba acting in self-defense. And while that does hold in terms of New York City as a whole, it's important to understand that this is a different district attorney. Now, if this was Bragg in Manhattan, he would likely do the same thing, but the attorney, the district attorney that is responsible for this, is District Attorney of the Bronx, Darcel Denise Clark, a woman who saw this video of a brutal and cowardly sucker punch, saw a convicted sex offender out on parole, saw the charges from the NYPD of attempted murder, heard heard about what happened to the victim in this case, who was in a coma at the time that she made the decision to reduce the charges, initially needed brain surgery, and thought, you know what? I need to advocate for that guy. The sex offender, the Aladdin that definitely sex offended and held a minor at gunpoint in order to perform sexual acts on himself in order to give bread to his family. That's the guy, that's team I'm on. And by the way, I'm going to leave her phone number for the district attorney's office in the Bronx if you want to tell her how you feel about somebody who thinks more about a person who is out on parole and would be so easy to throw back in prison than she does about someone who was victimized by that person.
If they brought assault in the third degree, which is misdemeanor assault.
Now, for those of you who don't know, a misdemeanor means you can be sentenced up to a year, but no more than that. And you don't go to prison, you go to a jail. So this assault that has left a man in a coma, a 52-year-old man who could die, he could be gone by the time that I release this video, according to the Bronx district attorney, even though the NYPD are like, this is clearly premeditated attempted murder, is not worthy of a year of this person's life. We need to protect the sex offender because, God forbid, anything should happen to him. Let's think about the systemic structural systemic oppression that might have led to this situation. It's shameful. It's disgusting. It is this pro-criminal attitude, and it is not just the Bronx district attorney, unfortunately, here in the city of New York that is creating these problems. The Manhattan district attorney is trash, but overall, the New York State bail reform law is trash because normally you would be able to look at these circumstances, and even if you reduced it insanely to a misdemeanor, a judge could say, you know what, pattern of behavior, out on parole, dangerous individual, this guy could die, we're going to hold you in jail or at least charge you some money in order to get your ass out of jail because we want something to make sure that you don't reoffend and we want something to make sure that you show up to court. What incentive does this guy have to show up to court? What incentive does this guy have if this person dies because of his actions? Nothing. Obviously he's on parole. Obviously he's already supposed to be supervised, and that didn't stop him from doing this vicious attack.
Certain crimes, such as the one that this individual was charged with, do not allow a judge to set bail. They are not considered bail-setting offenses. And until the bail reform law itself is reformed or changed, then these people are going to be allowed to be set free without bail being set.
Instead of acknowledging that this guy, who is a career criminal, who's a disgusting individual, is a risk, should be held behind bars, should have never been paroled in the first place, the state of New York has set up a system where you can't even look at that. You can't even think about that in terms of the context of this individual, no matter how many times he would reoffend, and you have to let him out automatically. If this guy came out on the streets tomorrow, which by the way, he's already out, and decided to do the same exact thing, sucker punch another individual in a premeditated way, that individual fell, needed brain surgery, needed to go to the hospital, was in a coma, and he was rearrested, according to the New York State bail law, then this person would still not be eligible to be charged any bail in order to get out of jail based on the charges. He could do it 600 times, and it would be fine because according to the New York State bail law, you can't look at any past history when informing your future choices. It's absurd. It's insanity on display all day, every day, and every Democrat in New York seems to be on board with it. Eric Adams likes to talk tough related to crime. Eric Adams likes to talk about how he's definitely against the criminals, but whenever the topic of any of these district attorneys who are clearly pro-criminal and don't care about the victim come up, Eric Adams is like, well, I support them because I'm all about criminal justice reform. Because in reality, in actuality, that whole thing about Eric Adams being a former cop and therefore being tough on crime was always nonsense. This guy was a Brooklyn borough president. You don't get to that position without being corrupt and fully entrenched in the Democratic Party establishment. And right now, the Democratic Party establishment is more on board with sex offenders who hold children at gunpoint for them to perform sex acts on them than they are on board for actual innocent people, for people who get sucker punched on the street that might ultimately end up dying. It's disgusting. It's shameful. And this is what we're seeing. And these are the consequences of this no cash bail system.
Police say this was an unprovoked attack. The victim, Jesus Cortez, was standing outside a Fuego Típico restaurant on East 188th Street when the suspect put on a pair of gloves and punched him with great force in the back of the head, leaving him unconscious. Cortez was rushed to the hospital where he underwent brain surgery and is currently in a coma.
Look, the thing that's so disgusting about these sucker punches is not only the brutality or the cowardice, but the fact is a lot of these can happen to anybody. I've seen sucker punches on a woman as the precursor to a robbery that netted the criminal almost no money. There should be zero tolerance for sucker punches under law. Criminals should know that this is going to be treated as an aggravated assault, if not an attempted murder, and you're going to be looking at years of your life in prison for participating in this. This is not acceptable, and yet time and time again it is treated like a regular fight, like a simple assault, like no big deal. How many times do we have to see people die? How many times do we have to see people have their skull cut into due to the fact that they need brain surgery because they were an unsuspecting victim of one of these sucker punch attacks? It's ridiculous, it's absurd, and the fact that Democrats in the city of New York are so on board for it, the fact that district attorneys are aiding and abetting these criminals by reducing their charges and giving them a slap on the ass as they walk out of jail to reoffend again is insane. Now, I've talked about on this channel multiple different times the policies, the criminal justice reforms that I'm in favor of, but the idea that you would say at this point in time in America that you're in favor of criminal justice reform makes you an idiot, because left-wing criminal justice reform is epitomized by the sucker punch. This is the symbol of the left's agenda. They tell you it's all about marijuana possession and making sure people aren't in jail due to marijuana, and then all of a sudden they knock you out from behind as they let all the criminals out the door. This is what they want. This is who they're in favor of, because it was never about individual liberty, because they don't care about individual liberty. It was solving the problem of disproportionate outcomes that make them uncomfortable. Remember, the sucker punch right here is actually a civil rights statement. This guy being let out actually really shows you that they care so hard about addressing systemic structural racism, because imagine if this attempted murderer was actually charged accurately and held in prison. That would be sad and look poorly on the statistics. Honestly, this story pissed me off, and I'm not going to go into it any further. That's all I got for you guys today. Like the video, share the video, let people know, call the Bronx District Attorney's office, give him a piece of your mind, be polite, be courteous, don't be threatening, don't be an idiot, but you know what to do. Just tell them no more pro-criminal nonsense. This has been me talking about a terrible case. Till next time.